Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fifth episode in a series of 6 Young-led webinars, which is part of the Climate Partnership webinar series organized by Energy Academy Indonesia and TYK Research and Action Consulting. My name is Thomas Glenn. I'm a master's graduate in Environment and Development at King's College London, and today I will be leading this webinar, which will be on the topic of climate knowledge, behavior, and action. With worsening environmental conditions, growing political tensions by nation states, and the work of activists consuming the headlines around the globe, discussions of how best to tackle the impacts of climate change are becoming front and center in the news cycle and on the political agenda. To effectively understand the impacts that climate change is having upon the world and the most effective methods needed to tackle them, methods must be developed to communicate these issues to politicians, policymakers, and to the public to promote the increasing of knowledge, the changing of behaviors, and the advancement of action in addressing this issue. To do so requires new understandings of how best to inform people about climate change and how it will affect them and the planet as a whole. There is a need to understand the personal attributes that causes some people to change their behaviors in response to the threat of climate change, and others to ignore the climate issues entirely. There is also scope to discover what methods are necessary to effectively stimulate behavioral changes in society as a whole in a way that translates to climate action on individual, national, and international scales. To discuss these issues, we will be hearing from 3 people who are involved with climate change issues, either through their educational backgrounds, academic research, or through their own careers. Firstly, we will hear from Dr. Berfu Unal, who is an assistant professor of social psychology at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. In her research, she explores how individual, social, and contextual factors interact to influence behavior and decision-making. She applies this expertise particularly to domains that remain to be important societal challenges in the face of sustainable development, such as environmental sustainability. Next, we will hear from Eric van Doorn, who is founder and owner of Studio Eco, which is specialized in the design and installation for NOM, zero meter, and autarkic off-grid homes, providing homes with solar energy, heat pumps for central heating, cooling, and hot water, and efficient LED lighting. Eric obtained a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the Arnhem-Nijmegen University of Applied Sciences and a master's degree in technology-based entrepreneurship from the Delft Technological University. And lastly, we will hear from Muhammad Ulil Hassan, who recently obtained his Master of Science in Development and Rural Innovation Program at Wageningen University and Research, the Netherlands. His research topic was on a local food system and food sovereignty in Indonesia. He has also been engaged in the People's Coalition for Food Sovereignty, an Indonesian non-governmental organization since 2014. Now, before I introduce our first speaker, I would like to invite everyone to please post any questions you have for our speakers on the live YouTube feed, who can then answer them during our question and answer session at the end. So without further ado, I introduce Dr. Berfu Unal.
Okay. Yeah, hello everyone. Also a warm welcome from me. And thanks, Thomas, for a nice introduction. In my talk, I will briefly talk about how to make climate knowledge more effective to motivate people act more sustainably. Well, we know that global temperature is rising, leading to all kinds of environmental problems, such as glacier retreat, water level rising, or decrease in snowfall. We also witness more and more these extreme weather events, right? These became a normal part of our lives. For instance, hurricanes, typhoons, storms, or droughts. So climate is changing, and we humans are the major contributors to this change. So indeed, evidence shows that human behavior is the leading cause of greenhouse gas emissions. So what kind of behaviors, for example, lead to high emissions? Just to give some examples, we consume a lot, and of course this requires a large industry, right? A production chain, which leads to high emissions as well. Or some other daily behaviors that we do, such as frequent meat consumption or heavy car use, lead to high greenhouse gas emissions. So if human behavior is the leading cause of global warming and climate change, perhaps by changing our behavior, we can also help with the solution of these problems and actually maybe mitigate the adverse consequences of climate change. So a challenging question we social psychologists deal with nowadays is how to motivate people to change their behavior. So one theory that I also use and that is commonly used in social and environmental psychology is the norm actuation model. And according to this model, sustainable behaviors or intentions are more likely when people have a certain kind of moral obligation to act sustainable. We call these personal norms. And this moral obligation is there when people have awareness about environmental problems, when they are concerned about environmental problems, but also when they believe that by changing their behavior, they can also change the outcome of these environmental problems. And this norm actuation model is being tested in different countries with different populations, usually having full support to this chain that indeed feeling moral obligation, having a strong personal norm leading to a change in behavior. So an interesting question is in this respect. So if we know for sure that if people are feeling morally obliged to act sustainably, they would do so. So what would trigger this whole norm activation process, this whole chain? One hypothesis from literature is that actually it's knowledge that would lead to such norm activation. Well, more precisely, based on this information deficit model, when people lack information, when people lack knowledge, then they can't, of course, act on this knowledge, so they wouldn't be able to act sustainably. In one of our studies in Groningen, we tested this assumption. We tested if indeed knowledge deficit or if indeed knowing about environmental problems would lead to some kind of normative behavior. So what we did is we gave participants, of course, questionnaires that we commonly do in psychology, and there was a knowledge questionnaire asking people about their knowledge on causes and consequences of global warming. For instance, there were items like the use of fossil fuels such as coal, gas, oil leads to global warming. The cutting of trees enhances global warming, or global warming leads to the extinction of species. I believe there were about 20 items like this. So participants indicated to what extent these statements are true or false. And in the end, we calculated a total score reflecting people's overall knowledge about the causes and consequences of global warming. And in this particular study, our dependent variable, so the sustainable behavior that we were interested in was eco-driving, because when people drive in an eco-friendly way, they consume less fuel, which is, of course, means also less CO2 emissions, right? So we tested if knowledge triggers this norm activation process, making people engage in more eco-driving. But what we found was actually knowledge was ineffective in triggering this norm activation process. So knowing about causes and consequences of global warming did not necessarily mean that people were aware of problems resulting from car use, or that they kind of felt responsible from this problem, or that they felt a moral obligation to change their behavior. So eventually what we found was knowledge was not motivating enough to kind of convince people that they should drive in a more fuel efficient way. So this is interesting because most of the time what we see in policymaking is, well, yes, information provision or knowledge, providing environmental knowledge is one of the #1 interventions that policymakers come up with or think of when they want to change behavior, right? But it seems that knowledge is not really readily effective. But of course, I don't want to depress you, so don't think that, okay, there's no future for knowledge. It's absolutely not like that. There are certain ways to make knowledge more motivating or effective. And I would like to briefly talk about like 3 ways maybe how knowledge could be more motivating. So what we see from literature is, first, climate knowledge is more motivating for people who already have a strong concern for the environment. We call these people people with biospheric values. So they strongly concern about the biosphere, about the nature and the environment. Again, in one study from my lab, my colleagues were interested in coming up with a strategy to reduce plastic bottle use. So they provided information to participants on the adverse environmental consequences of plastic bottle use. People read this information leaflet, and they also measured values of the participants, so what they find important in life. And they found that actually this information leaflet on environmental impacts of plastic bottle use was more effective among people who are more biospheric. So if people already had a concern for the environment, then they paid more attention to what it said on the leaflet, and they said they would actually change their behavior and start using tap water. And for people who have a strong concern for other things, like for instance, people with egoistic values who value their finances, actually this environmental information did not work at all. So this brings to my second point. How can you, of course, not everyone is biospherically oriented, right? So how can we also convince those others who who have a key concern for some other things? So we believe that tailoring information could be effective. So if you tailor or if you frame information such that it kind of resonates with what people find important in life, then it would be more effective. For example, imagine that for someone who values their finances, so people with egoistic values, we could provide information on the financial benefits that might come with, for instance, environmental behavior like energy saving. Or for someone who values helping the community, these are altruistic values, as you see in the picture, we could maybe mention more the societal and collective benefits of acting environmentally friendly rather than environmental benefits. So indeed, we last year carried out a study on tailoring messages, and initial evidence suggests that indeed when you tailor messages to people's key values, then it's more persuasive for people. And finally, the last point I want to make, sometimes people are they might have some motivation, but maybe they don't know how to act, right? So when people lack procedural knowledge, this could be a big barrier as well. Like in the study that I talked about with eco-driving, imagine if people don't know how to eco-drive, what kind of behaviors we mean by eco-driving, they wouldn't be able to anyway carry out it, right? So procedural knowledge sometimes can be effective, can act like this initial push to motivate people. And following me, there are 2 more speakers, Eric and Udel, as Thomas introduced. They're going to talk about, for instance, sustainable farming practices, or how to make your house more energy efficient. So I believe procedural knowledge could also be a factor in those domains as well. So if there's time remaining, maybe we could also reflect on it all together. So to conclude, I think knowledge is a good start, but in itself, it's not motivating enough. But there are certain ways to make it more motivating, certain strategies. So there's still hope. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer.
Okay, great. Thank you both for your very interesting presentation. I very much liked hearing you say give hope. I think it's a very hopeful bit of research you've got, because it's not only providing, academic information, but it can also be tailored towards different demographics, which is the most important thing where you have to work out.
Yeah, there are a lot of implications, of course. Yeah.
Exactly. I did want to ask actually, in regards to what you said about tailoring and tailoring to different demographics. In regards to how this could work on a sort of practical policy level?
Yeah, very good question. So first of all, well, I already said practitioners usually have a key eye on just providing information. What I would recommend first that they should refrain from doing this, because this leads to the so-called information overload. You don't have a lot of cognitive, we wouldn't like to use all our cognitive resources to process all the information that is available. So we tend to be selective, and that's why actually based on our values, we might just ignore some information, right? So my first advice would be just to stop providing this bulk information to people, because this is hardly going to be effective. And by tailoring it to people's key motivations, practitioners could increase the chance that people will actually pay attention to it. And we also tested this in another study. And indeed, people spend more time on reading information that are relevant for their key values. So please spend more time in processing that kind of information. And how can you tailor information? It's not easy, of course. But information technologies are commonly used nowadays, and more information is provided via websites or apps, right? Because we don't want to also use paper. So with a simple screening, when someone comes to your website or uses your app, with a simple screening, inquiring about their values, you could find out about what people find important in life and tailor messages or information accordingly. And then you might increase the chances of message reception and people spending time on actually reading your knowledge material, I would say. So that would be one practical implication, I would say.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Very interesting, definitely. Well, it'd be great to talk more, but we should move on to our second presentation by Eric van Doorn. Oh,
Eric.
Mike, turn your mic on.
So, good evening. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about a little bit about myself and about my company and what I do and what I did. Let me get my slides. Here they are. Okay, so, well, my name's Eric, and I run my own company, which is called Studio Eco. And yeah, we try to help people make the right decisions and to make their housing more sustainable, mostly. And yeah, one of these things is awareness is really important. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about that. First, a little introduction about myself. I started mechanical engineering, and in the end, I started to do energy tech. That was my graduation, and I must say that was actually mostly because of my father. He was a big influence on me, and that was because like 20 years ago, he built himself a house, and my mom, and he already installed a heat pump back then, which like nobody did, and he used a lot of insulation and stuff, and yeah, all these things that were not common, but he did that, and that brought me to studying yeah, energy technology and how to save energy, which led to yeah, having my own consultancy company. And what I did, I made energy labels for yeah, for homeowners, and all these kind of advices on yeah, how to make your house more sustainable, or use solar panels, stuff like that. But I found that it was not really yeah, doing it, and I'll come back to that later, because yeah, people would make choices based on money, but I'm going to talk about that later. So what I did is I founded Sustainable Playgrounds, which was focused on children, and to let children understand that energy is not just coming from your wall plug, but you actually have to do something for it. So we designed a playground where you can generate some electricity, so you could, let's say, charge your phone and then use it to connect to a really large speaker, which you could actually sit on and stuff like that. And that was the idea. It did fail in the end, unfortunately, because there was so much money and attention needed to get a playground like that off the ground. But actually some big playground companies actually followed our example, and they also made playgrounds like this. So that was a win, I guess. After that, I founded a solar energy company, and yeah, that was coming from the energy consultancy company, and it was mostly because people didn't know where to start, and that was actually what I heard Berfu saying as well. There's an information overload, so you don't know where to, yeah, actually, you know, where do you need to start? And then solar started, and it was becoming visible how to save energy, right? So instead of changing your light bulbs to LED and actually go check where you could save energy by installation, people would install solar panels first, and then they would become more aware, I would say. But yeah, after some time, I was really done with this. So I decided, well, what if I stop doing energy and start focusing on beekeeping? Because at the time, the colony collapse was kind of a thing. And yeah, it really struck me. So I was like, you know, I need to do something with this. So I quit my old company and started doing beekeeping full time. But after a while, that was not really satisfying. So I started Studio Eco, which I'm still doing today. And with the work we're doing with Studio Eco, we're also trying to do something back for the environment directly, not only through solar panels and everything, but also for the bees and the environment. But I'll come back to that later. Yeah, and I also, that was kind of a thing, I guess, in my life, and it was, I sold my house, I built a camper, and I became a digital nomad. And I did that for some time. And I also, yeah, read up on minimalism, all that kind of stuff, because we were just, we heard from Berfu that, yeah, the awareness is quite important, and the knowledge. And obviously, this was my line of work, kind of. And I also started to become more and more aware about my footprint and stuff like that. So that was an important phase, I would say, in my life, and helped me to form Studio Eco further as well. Some struggles and opportunities. I already talked a little bit about this, but Trias Energetica is normally you start with saving energy, then you use sustainable sources like solar energy to power your house, for instance, and then you use fossil fuels. And we noticed, and this was during the crisis, that people would start buying solar energy, and then from there they would like, oh, I'm saving, let's say, 1,000 kilowatt hours per year. That's 200 euros. Oh, what else can I save? And I must say that has changed a bit lately because the climate is in the news, obviously. And people also start to think about the climate and maybe their children even. That's what I didn't hear Berfu saying, but sometimes that's what you hear people say. They do it for their children or for their grandchildren. And they buy an electric Volvo, for instance. And even companies market this, I think. So yeah, that was something we saw during the crisis. It was purely motivation was based on money, so energy saving, and they would get their investment back in a few years. And still, a lot of the products you see in our market are marketed like this. So LED lighting, you get back in a year. Installation for your house, you get back in 4 years. Stuff like that. It's still being used a lot. Money as a big motivator. So energy versus bees, I already talked a bit like this. Talked about that a little bit. Then theory and practical application, and consulting engineering to holistic engineering. And what I mean by this is that in the beginning, I was really a consulting engineer. I was telling people how they could make their house more efficient, use insulation, and I came up with the greatest ideas, or at least that's what I thought. How to save energy, really creative. But then in the end, these plans would end up on a shelf, because they would come to an installing company or a contractor, and they would say, yeah, that's not how we do it. You know, normally we do it like this and this and this, and yeah, sorry. So to change that a little bit, we decided to do it ourselves. And I started with solar energy, and now more and more we see housing as a whole concept, which I'll get back to. Then craft work versus office. I used to sit in an office 40 hours plus a week, and you can do really great work in an office, obviously, but at some point it was just not satisfying enough anymore for me. So I started to work with my hands as well, and I started to put the solar panels up on the roof. So I designed the system, I went to talk with the client, all these things, but I would also install the system, and it was so satisfying, actually. And more and more people I talk to have an academic background. They don't want to sit in an office 40 hours a week anymore. They also want to do something with their hands. So you see, craft work is kind of, at least I think, lifting. More and more people want to do something, build something with their hands. And what I think is there's a great way to combine these things. So one of the things I want to do with Studio Eco is everyone that works here combines these things. So you can sit in the office and you can write reports and everything. We try to not do that a lot, but you also go to the customer and actually help install something and create something, and it's very, very satisfying. Another struggle was freedom and footprint. So how can you do this in a business? How can you reduce your footprint, and get freedom? That's why we, I guess, sold our house at the time, and built a camper and traveled Europe, because at first we thought, well, we're going to travel the world, and but then you have to use a plane everywhere, go everywhere. So that was not really the way to go, at least not for me, because of the climate, and also by selling our house and building that camper, we had to get rid of, let's say, 90% of our stuff. And we didn't throw everything away, but we gave it away, or we sold it, or and that was also really freeing. And right now, what I notice a lot is that you can be really busy. It's like you bought something yesterday, and then today you're kind of focused on where can I improve my life again, right? What do I need next? At least for me, that's still really a thing. But then I think back on the few of the books I read, and I should be happy with what I have. And I think that kind of behavior as well can be a big change. And one of the things we do for our customers is being involved in tiny houses as well. And that shift to tiny houses has a few positive things, I guess, which is you cannot put so much stuff in your house anymore. you're going to be more outside. Yeah, and you're going to use less energy, right? So that's, I think, one of the greatest things about that. Holistic engineering, that's what we're trying to do now. And next to, let's say, heat pumps, solar energy, and ventilation, what we install these climate systems for houses, but we also design them. And I guess that's also a big change, because right now we're actually being taken serious by architects. And in the beginning, we're sitting around the table with the architect and the customer, where 10 years ago, I was also talking about sustainable housing and everything. And just people would kind of laugh at me like, yeah, right. And right now we're being, we're being taken serious, I guess, on that subject. So that's a great thing. And more I try to see housing as a part of nature, natural housing. So I took a little picture of an eco pavilion we're gonna develop this year, next year, to show people, I guess, a little showcase on how you can do things. And the last thing I wrote down was fighting the climate or working with the climate. And I think that last thing is going to be more and more important because of climate change. Things are getting really warm, and we can say, well, we'll just install an air conditioning and we'll cool our, our space down. But in the long run, that will only warm the planet up more, because we're going to use more energy. So by working together with the environment and seeing a house as a part of nature and yourself actually as well, I think that's the way we should go to actually tackle this kind of big problem. Well, customer journey. So what we're doing with Studio Eco is when people buy solar panels right now, we're actually giving them a tree, and you can plant it in your garden. That's kind of the objective, because you see so much pavement everywhere, and that's also heating up the planet, so not really a good thing. So that's a small thing we're doing, and next to that, we're gonna try to let people experience natural housing, so they can stay in an eco cabin, and we're gonna try to plant that seed on awareness. So what we did with sustainable playgrounds, but now on make big children more aware, I guess. And last thing is, we're also going to develop these cabins so we can get affordable small houses which include natural environment. That's what we're doing in Studio Eco. So I hope I inspired a little bit, hopefully someone. And yeah, thanks.
Well, great. Thanks very much for your presentation, Eric. I found it especially inspiring to hear of someone that's gotten an interest in the environment and sustainable housing, and who sort of, as you said, became a digital nomad and went on to do it yourself. And then now you're inspiring other people to do it, which is quite interesting for the people watching, I think.
Thanks.
I did want to ask, I'm quite interested in learning more about your clientele with Studio Eco. And why do you believe you've already touched on it slightly, but to go into more detail, why you believe certain people are more interested in sustainable and housing and infrastructure the organization develops? You briefly mentioned money as a motivator for certain people, but I thought it'd be good to hear more about why specifically you think it's of interest.
Why people choose with their money? Is that what you're...
Yes, exactly.
Well, I think, Dutch people are mostly also, I guess, yeah, what's the English word for that? They're like yeah, like I guess wise with their money. So they they want to get something the cheapest, and that's really something they're always trying to do, to get something really cheap.
Yes.
So that's also something we're experiencing with yeah, with the products we're trying to sell, I guess. But yeah, the most important thing or interesting thing I thought a few years ago was that they would actually they would buy something which they could also show to the neighbors as well. So they put solar panels on their house, and there was something visible, and then they would have an app, and on that app they could show on a you know, on a birthday or something, like, oh, today I got 100 kilowatt hours, and that's like 20 euros. So great, that's what I saved today. And that was really a start, I think, something visible. Yeah.
That can be discussed with others.
Sorry?
That can be discussed with others and shared with others.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Maybe that led to the other behavior. And at some point, LED lighting got more and more cheap, and you could buy it at IKEA. And right now, they only have LED lighting at IKEA, right? So these are all really good things. And another thing I thought Berfu was also saying, and I wrote down, it was people don't know where to start, right? It can be really difficult because there's so much information. We don't go to the library with our library card anymore to read a book on sustainability. No, we Google how to make my house more sustainable or something. And there's so much information and disinformation, and this makes it really hard. Yeah, and yeah, so maybe in that case, or in that sense, solar was and it still is a big contributor to the problem or the solution, because it's something so visible and it's being discussed. And it's a good start.
I can also say something. Indeed, like big investments like this to innovations, like for instance solar panels, right? They also have a signaling function indeed. And the signaling function also, just like you described, once you do that behavior, you're also more likely to engage in other types of behaviors.
Yep.
It's also kind of giving you some kind of status, of course, right? So you feel like, oh, I did something for the environment. So it's a green status, neighbors see it, and it also increases the likelihood of you doing other behaviors. I think it's a very good example indeed, solar. In that sense.
Driving a Tesla, for instance.
Yeah.
Well, great, thanks, very interesting. So we'll thank you very much for your presentation, Eric. I think we'll move on now to hear the final presentation by Muhammad Ulil Hassan.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas, for introducing me, and thank you for both speakers, previous speakers, and enlightening and also inspiring presentations from Berfu and also Eric. So in this case, I want to present about my experience in designing and implementing a collaborative campaign on farmer regeneration, and I want to relate it to climate change issues. So, okay, let me share my screen. Yeah. Okay, so I would like to present three main topics here. First, the condition of farmers aging in Indonesia, and also climate change and how to integrate climate change issues in farmer regeneration campaign that we conducted in this last 6 years. So, yeah, farmers are aging in Indonesia. More than 50% of food in Indonesia produced by small-scale farmers, and then in 2013, according to agriculture census, there are more than thousands farmers are flat farming every day. and then also 5 million farmers decline in 10 years. So it threatens the food production in Indonesia. So so the tenth of this issue is about how to produce food for 250 million people in Indonesia sustainably. And then in 2016, we conducted research on farmer regeneration factors in several districts. So what we found is there are several factors that influence the farmer regeneration. So we did an interviews, surveys to the parents and also the young people in the rural areas in several districts in Java Island. So we found that land ownership is one of the factors that's affecting farmer regeneration. So the more you have land, for example, 1 or 2 hectares, the farmer regeneration tend to be happened. And in reverse, people in Indonesia, the majority of farmers in Indonesia has less than 1 hectare land ownership. So that's one of the factors. And then also the types of farming. So there's a difference between horticulture production and also rice production in terms of farmer regeneration. So farmer regeneration happens more in horticulture rather than in rice farming because of the income. So for example, in horticulture production, you don't need a bigger land. You can sell it in a higher price rather than rice farmers. In the rice farming system, you got a less income because the high dependence of fertilizer. You need to buy chemical pesticides and other inputs. So, and also the third factor is the influence of parents. So the parents has a very important role to how to say to convince young people to work in agriculture. But the fact is, a lot of parents, in this case, parents that are farmers, they don't want their children continue doing farming because of the income, because of a lot of works. So it's not a promising jobs for their children. So that's why a lot of young people move to the city and then find a better job in the office and then yeah another kind of jobs. And also lastly, it's about information exposure. So because of lack information about how to do farming, how to do creatively sustainable farming system and then tools to agriculture. So this lack of information also affecting the farmer regeneration. So when we talk about climate change in Indonesia, as we know that lately there are a lot of news on extreme drought in Indonesia in many regions, also pest outbreak, flood. So the climate is changing and then create these disasters in agriculture. But however, small farmers has less information and understanding to adapt this and mitigate the climate change. So issues of climate change is not really become an important information for the farmers. So and also there's still high use of unsustainable inputs. The legacy of Green Revolution since 1917, which is creating high dependence on chemical fertilizer and also um, uh, pesticides that create imbalance ecological systems also. So the climate change increase vulnerability for small scale farmers. And then how can it be related to the farm regeneration? So the climate change issue could make farming become an insecure job or insecure activities. That's why it could create uh, young people don't really attracted to doing agriculture works. So it can affect national food um, production issues. So And next, how to include it. We did, based on these issues, we did a campaign, collaborative campaign between my organization, KRKP, People's Coalition for Food Sovereignty, together with Oxfam in Indonesia, AgriPro Focus, and Kyle. And we created a campaign called Young Agripreneur Ambassadors, and which is selecting young farmers as an ambassador, and 10 young farmers, and then we did a training, awarding, and also try to inspire young people to do more agriculture. So we selected more than 500 registered young farmers, and then after that we selected 10 young farmers in this training, which is very important events. We integrate the climate knowledge, and then it was delivered by a researcher lecturer from Agriculture University in Indonesia. Also, we integrated organic agriculture, more sustainable agriculture practices course, and also excursion in enterprises that market sustainable products. After the training, we conducted awarding and media engagement, introduced them, these 10 selected young farmers, to the media, and also engaging them to the local community. And in this case, I want to highlight how actually the course on climate knowledge affecting their activities after the campaign. So I want to highlight three out of 10 selected young farmers, which is now actively engaged in the local community and then inspire more people in their areas. First is Maya Scholastica. She is one of the champions, and then she founded 12 of Organic, and then now she has been selected as Secretary General of Indonesian Organic Alliance. And her story about the climate knowledge is, so she explained me about what she got from the climate information. It's about recording and identification of climate changing in a respective in their region. For example, record the last climatic changing in, for example, in Surabaya. So based on this knowledge, he used it to choose wisely choose different varieties of seeds, which one is more suitable in this kind of soil temperature, etc., etc. So this little knowledge on recording the temperature of soil could help her to wisely choose and seed varieties. And then the next champion is Apni. She's from North Sumatra, different islands. She founded Siantar Sehat, it's organic vegetable startup. And then she used the climate knowledge to improve the product quality. For example, so in her region, the farmers used to plant only one varieties of vegetable. And then later on, after getting this kind of knowledge, she could identify that actually lately the climate is changing rapidly. For example, from rainy season to very dry season. And after that, she tried to convince the farmers, including herself, changing her way to produce a vegetable in a diverse way. For example, when it's rainy seasons, she convinced farmers not to plant a leafy vegetable, because when it's rainy season, the product of leafy vegetable will be very poor, the quality, I mean. So, but the first response that she got is, yeah, the farmers neglected her. And then later the farmers then uh, got a very poor quality of vegetable because of they didn't listen to her advices. Then yeah, she tried to help by improving product processing, by making snack from the bad quality of vegetable. So and then after that the farmers followed her, and also yeah, the farmers were convinced by these young farmers. And lastly is Friska Horinisa. She is the founder of Blasta Organic, using a hydroponic system, organic vegetable through hydroponic system in city of Padang in West Sumatra. For her, climate knowledge is important in pest management system. So because she realized that she was very so the challenge of pest in her farming is yeah, it's very important, because at first she didn't know how to identify actually uh, what kind of pest that can be appeared in certain climatic condition. So after getting the climate knowledge and recording, and then finally she could cope with the changing of uh, climate, and then also could manage the pest, and also could use different types of pest management system. So and then yeah, and then she in fact that yeah, for her the climate could not be predicted. And then yeah, and then sometimes for her everyday activities, she does people don't realize that uh, activities in their life could affect to the climate change. For example, now she changed her activities, changing the use of plastic in her farming to be more sustainable tools. So finally, these young people need to convince other young people to show them that farming is a profitable and cool job for young people. So, and in this case, climate small little knowledge on climate is essential to make their farming more effective. And then also this is essential to inspire young people to work in agriculture. So I think that's the case for me. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's great to hear the sort of nuts and bolts of farming in regards to young people, because obviously it was quite interesting to hear you talk about how parents struggle with teaching their kids to work in farming, because it just seems to them like a difficult career to get into. Did you, from your research, did you notice any change in maybe the parents' opinions in regards to the career options of farming in any way?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we didn't do a research about, we didn't do a follow-up action to how to change the parents' perception on seeing agriculture. But the thing here is, I think I cannot generalize that all of the parents are encouraging their children to not working in agriculture. In our interview also, we found some of the parents, um, they they try to give a freedom for their children to choose their activities. And also, but the thing is here, why actually the parents don't want their children to do work in agriculture, because their previous experience on agriculture, and also the land ownership. So because of yeah, agriculture's work, it's only for sustaining their life, not for encourage it's for subsistence ways in most of the small scale farmers in Indonesia. So in this case too, in yeah, to increase awareness of parents to make their children to involve in agriculture. Yeah, it's quite a challenging work, including maybe in the policy or maybe in informations to their parents that actually agriculture is a promising job. But yeah, we didn't really think about the strategy yet. But it's also local culture is very, how to say, important factors. So in Indonesia we have a diverse kind of culture, and also the parents-son relationship, and tied in this cultural system. So it also can be uh, a factors of farmer regeneration. So yeah, maybe we can discuss it later. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks again for your very interesting presentation. We've got just under 5 minutes, but I just wanted to quickly ask for a point from each of the speakers in terms of a sort of the greater scheme of things in regards to your previous research and careers. I thought, environmental issues, climate change crisis are terms we hear very often in the modern day. I thought it'd be interesting to ask, from your own perspectives and based off of your own fields of work and experience, what ideas you may have in regards to what needs to be done to promote behavioral change and action with the public or with politicians and policymakers. So maybe a summary of what you've just discussed, or maybe some other ideas you want to quickly mention. So I thought maybe I could start with Berfu, if you have any ideas in terms of this topic.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mainly, since the topic was on knowledge, I mainly discuss, of course, how to make knowledge more motivating to change behavior of people, but there are also all kinds of other strategies that also, like the other speakers also touched upon. For instance, there are social norm strategies. For instance, if a behavior, let me rephrase it. If people think that a certain behavior will be more prominent in the future. For example, if you see that the government is investing on infrastructure for electric vehicles, right? So if they, for instance, invest on building charging stations, so then you start thinking, okay, this is coming, this is going to be more prominent in the future, so I also need to adopt my behavior accordingly. So in that sense, I think if we want to change behavior like in a like vast amount of people's behavior, I think what the government or policymakers should do is to somehow really signal that this is going to be the norm, this is going to be the thing in the near future, so better adjust your behavior accordingly. So I wanted to say it on top of what I already said with knowledge and framing of messages, because we already talked about it, but I think this could be some kind of advice.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And Ulil, any last points you'd like to make?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think I want to address about what I discussed before, actually, about how actually a little knowledge on climate can create a more impactful action for these young agripreneur ambassadors. For instance, about the recording how to actually projecting the climate change, or also try to create a strategy to cope with to work, like Eric said, that maybe to work with the climate, for instance. So I think for the policymakers, or maybe the project related to agriculture informations or climate change informations, it's better to identify actually the needs of young farmers what kind of knowledge that they really need to make farming more effective and maybe more profitable for them. For instance, in this case, climate knowledge, it's only like identifying or try to recording skill on recording climates. It's very useful for them to make farming more effective. So I think that's what I want to add. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Eric, last point.
Last point. Well, first thing that, or at least, yeah, what I want to say, I think, is connection and communication, and a place where people, also, let's say, academic people and people from, like, with their feet in the dirt, where they can come together and actually start talking to each other. So I think also the research Ulil has done, and actually educating these farmers, that's something really important, right? And it goes both ways. So what we are trying to do as a, let's say, installing company right now, is that we're trying to create a place near here in the middle of Holland, where people actually can come together to get their feet in the dirt, experience that small housing, that it might be something for them, a food forest, stuff like that, and where they can talk to each other and inspire each other with knowledge, because there is knowledge, I guess, and like Ulil said as well, it's mostly the old people that have at least some knowledge, maybe not on climate change, for instance, but there is a lot of knowledge, but it needs to find its way to to the right people, I guess, who start doing something with it. So yeah, hopefully that can be something where people can contribute by going to these places, or maybe start these places.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'd like to say thank you for all three of our excellent speakers, and I'd like to thank everyone watching who attended this webinar. And to conclude, I urge everyone to also watch the sixth Young-led webinar occurring on the 6th of October on the topic of climate economics and development. This will be led by Peter Ackerman of the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. I'd like to say thank you again to our three speakers, and thank you so much for watching.